All right, moving on. Days after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau blurted that there was no hard evidence or proof backing the serious allegations leveled against India with regards to the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, RCMP has also backtracked. In a fresh statement, they have now said that there is no imminent threat to the public from the network of criminals operating in India for the government of India, even though earlier they had stated that the agents of the Indian government were involved in widespread acts of violence in Canada. With that being said, India has also informed Canada about Khalistani terrorist Sandeep Singh Sidhu, who has been working as a border police official in Canada. He is responsible for the murder of Comrade Bakwinder Singh Sandhu, a Shaurya Chakra awardee who was shot dead outside his home in Bhikwin in Tarantaran in October 2020. The question that comes up is, what action is Canada going to take now? Will they act or remain quiet on this matter? Well, we know the answer to that. We'll talk about this with our guest. Joining us on the show is Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat. Dr. Swasti Rao, fellow at the MPID SA, is also with us on the show. Mr. Vicky Nanjappa, journalist. He's been tracking internal security. And last but by no means the least, Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, also joins us on the show. Professor Nalapat, what do you make of this admission by the Canadian government, the RCMP, as well as the Prime Minister, that there is no evidence? Whatever we are saying, whatever we are talking about, whatever the allegations, it's just a shot in the dark.
I'd like to say, Vineet, that it's very unfortunate that Prime Minister Trudeau went before Parliament and made a very startling comment about India. And very frankly, India and Canada are two countries that need to be close to each other, and that would both countries would benefit if they were close to each other. Fortunately, although at the diplomatic level matters are strained, at other levels matters are still proceeding on a smooth track. I'd like to say that I'm glad that the Canadians have woken up to a realization that a lot of what they call facts are basically based only by raw intelligence. And raw intelligence is collected from all over. And a lot of that is completely thrown out also, subsequently on verification. And I wish that Prime Minister Trudeau had waited, had not gone and upped the ante so sharply, so quickly, as to himself declare before Parliament that India was responsible. And even now, the RCMP is talking about criminal gangs being basically backed by the government of India. Now, I certainly do not believe that the government of India is going to back criminal gangs. We have enough problems, criminals on our own. And more to the point, Canada has enough problems with criminals on its own. And I think it's very important for the Prime Minister to turn his attention to that, turn his attention to drug cartels, to turn his attention to the money laundering cartels, and ensure that the epidemic of cocaine and heroin is reduced. Because now in a single province, British Columbia, 6 to 7 people are dying every day of opioid overdose. 6 to 7 people every day. Of course, I'm rather surprised that this doesn't find a mention in Parliament, but the mention of someone who is a known facilitator of terror does find mention in the Canadian Parliament. I'd just like to say that, I think it's good that India gave that particular information about that border policeman, and there must be many more. And I think I have said from the start, India needs to be open, transparent, basically about presenting the facts that India has got about the terror networks operating in Canada, including some who have embedded themselves in the police and the other administrative services. It's very important to out not just one, but maybe 20, 30 of them, and to basically put on the internet exactly what they've been responsible for and exactly what the evidence is. Trudeau is asking India to be transparent. What he's basically saying, you admit your guilt when there's no guilt. I think we should be transparent, and we should identify more such people, and we should put them out in the public eye so that people understand that these people are roaming around freely in Canada, and as yet, unfortunately, no action has been taken against them.
Absolutely. Ambassador Mukherjee, how seriously can Canada be taken now on an international arena, considering the fact that they've literally been faffing the culpability or the angle of culpability when it comes to Hardeep Singh Nijjar?
I think, Vineet, it is now important for the Indian public through your channel to understand that there is a deep-rooted US linkage with the actions of Canada. Canada is not acting on its own. Canada has got the full support of the US State Department up to a certain level, and this pressure is being put on India to make India fall in line on certain actions which the West would like India to fall in line with. And that includes, for instance, our relationship with Russia or the measures that we've taken to ensure that the Indian economy did not suffer because of unilateral sanctions imposed on Russia, etc. These are pressure tactics. Trudeau is being used by US the way Zelensky is being used by the US, exactly the same way. So it is now time for us to understand that we are not in a boxing match with Trudeau. We are actually in the process of combating a deep-rooted conspiracy against the Indian state, the Indian government and the Indian people. On one hand, to delegitimize our government and those who are at the top of the government, Prime Minister, etc., to destroy India's image and credibility internationally, and to make us culpable, and at the same time to convey a message to the Russians and the Chinese that if they try to do allegedly what we are supposed to have allegedly done, the same treatment will be meted out to them. So it is not such a simple thing as just Trudeau versus India. That's my first point. The second point is that we have been open and transparent and asked for proof. Mr. Trudeau has had to admit on oath that he has no proof. He went by intelligence, as Professor Nalapat said. Intelligence can be of various sources, and intelligence is not proof. Thirdly, what the Indian High Commissioner in Canada has been accused of, and other Indian diplomats, is that they were gathering information on people of Indian origin and others whose acts were inimical to India's national security and passing the information on to India. That is exactly what diplomats are supposed to do. In all my postings, I have done exactly the same. That is what the Canadian diplomats do in India. That is what the Canadian diplomats do in Russia or in China or even in friendly countries. They do the same thing. That does not mean that the Indian High Commissioner or the Indian Embassy is hand in glove in efforts at extrajudicial killings, although of course extrajudicial killing, as we say in English, is perfectly kosher if it is done by the Americans or the West, because they have the right to, the sovereign right that they have decided that they have to go after terrorists and kill them. That right is not given to second-class countries, including India. But in any case, we have never accepted that extrajudicial killings are part of our foreign policy or strategic policy. We have totally rejected such allegations. But if the allegation is that Indian diplomats go to Canada and gather information about activities, hostile activities of terrorists operating freely on Indian soil, terrorists that we have asked for extradition, yes, indeed we have. That is their job. That is what I did when I was in service. That is what Canadian diplomats do. That's what American diplomats do. That is our job. We are not supposed to be sitting there and drinking milk and honey. We are supposed to be gathering evidence to ensure that India's national interests are secure. And for that, if we have to give information to our government, that is precisely what we are there for. So I don't understand what a simplistic and foolish argument that this so-called former High Commissioner of Canada has given to the press today. He's done exactly the same thing. Everybody does that. What are diplomats supposed to do? They are supposed to go there to make sure that the national interests of the country they represent are not being subverted. And if in doing so they have to give information to their government, they will give information to the government. That's why they are there. Beneath.
Vicky Nanjappa, this is obviously an embarrassment for Canada on more levels than one. But the fact of the matter is that India does have an upper hand now. There is some leverage to the fact that, Canada has been caught lying here. They have been accusing India, admonishing India, rebuking the system, invoking things like sovereignty and democracy into their allegations. But the fact of the matter is that their entire setup or their premise for targeting India was based or had no proof.
Absolutely. Actually, Vineet, if I were to add, see, over the past decade, there have been at least 26 extradition requests which India has made. And this was a statement made by the Ministry of External Affairs on October 17th, that, that they have not acted upon it. And the thing is, as Ambassador Mukherjee very rightly pointed out, is that, you're not going to some other country to drink honey and milk. The thing is, we have asked for certain extradition requests and they have not adhered to it. That is one part of it. And something as simple as a case like, even a person caught cheating, I think that guy's name was Gursharan, that extradition request has also not been adhered to. So, in the whole bargain, Canada has ended up making its country a safe haven for all these, criminal and terrorist elements. And now, why won't India interfere in at least gathering information about these people who are sitting, maybe a Lawrence Bishnoi gang or, the whole Khalistani element sitting there? Or what is wrong, in gathering information and passing it back to our national security, agencies out here? I mean, because these gangs are clearly operating out there. They have not really, done anything within Canada, but they are trying to do each and everything that is, hurting our internal security, our sovereignty and things. So what is wrong in what we are doing? We are only gathering information on them. And very, very rightly said is that, this is not a game that Trudeau is playing. We've always had this, a bit of an issue with Canada for many, many years, that they are not, they have, always, tried to protect these elements under the garb of, free speech or, some electoral commitments or, things like that. But today, I feel that, he is being played, by the United States because, they are not clearly happy with the relationship we share with Russia, or we being part of BRICS. So, it is kind of an arm twisting tactic. And just see the timing, of Vikas Yadav getting, being indicted out there, and then, Canada making the statement, and then, the things which are unfolding in Bangladesh. We are all very aware of what Sheikh Hasina said, before the ouster about the deep state being involved and things. So it's kind of a, whole ecosystem that is at work, which is, trying to play us down. But yes, extremely embarrassing for Canada. There are contradictory statements. The Prime Minister is saying something, he's playing, he's playing along, somebody else's script. And on the other hand, there are people who are, not exactly in support of what he's saying. There are some, within the political circles also who are not in agreement. So it's become, one monumental mess at the end of it. And as I said yesterday also on the show, this is not, it's not some kind of a simple game that, Trudeau is playing. He's being played on. And ultimately at the end of it, they are going to face the consequences because these elements who are sitting there who he's protecting under the name of free speech are extremely dangerous elements. They're capable of, of massive bombings, they're capable of referendums, they're capable of desecration and things like that. And if that is not working out, and another point which I want to say is that how much ever they've tried, that Khalistan movement is not catching traction within India out here. And when they get frustrated, they're going to start, attacking the locals out there. And at the end of it, he's digging his own grave.
So, Asti, this is something which Canada has been involved and indulged in ever since the Kanishka crash. And we all know what kind of a lopsided, lackluster effort that was when it came to actually apprehending and prosecuting those people who were involved. And it continues decades on. What do you think is the problem here when it comes to Canada and India?
So, well, very quickly, I mean, there's a variety of views here. So, on the one hand, it's very clear that Canada has literally made a mockery of itself, and especially under Trudeau. And let's remember that Trudeau has been leading. He's been the Prime Minister for the last 9 years. So, obviously, and of course, you mentioned Kanishka, but then it's just so counterintuitive that, I mean, if there is one victim of the Khalistani menace, that's actually been the Canadian themselves, right? And then it's just now seems that they've completely forgotten about it for whatever electoral compulsions they have. And we have, I think, on your show or elsewhere, been discussing a lot about how for Trudeau, this is also a way of trying to divert attention from how, there were accusations of Chinese interference. And, I think it was somebody who called it China Gate and all that. So I think we know that there's a variety of factors that right now exist in Canadian politics, which is a combination of domestic politics, which is a combination of perhaps Trudeau legacy and all that. But end of the day, I think one needs to call out what needs to be called out, which is that this man was simply standing in the parliament and making a mockery of himself by saying that he has some intelligence inputs. I'm very glad Professor Nalpat, brought that point that, I mean, if you really go into the details of how intelligence is gathered, how intelligence is then processed, I mean, raw intelligence is raw intelligence. There's raw intelligence about everything, and then that doesn't really count as hard proof. And I think what Trudeau has done by doing what he is doing is that he has also discredited himself completely. Now, it is very clear. So I think the next step to this is that we really have to see. We've been seeing how the opposition in Canada is coming after Trudeau himself. I have also seen that it's not just Trudeau and it's not just the Liberals, but also the Conservatives that have been mollycoddling all these separatists for many years. But I do see that opposition in Canada understands that perhaps the biggest embarrassment for Canada today is Trudeau himself. So I think the proof of the pudding would lie in the eating. And we have to see, India, I think how we go ahead with our problems with Canada. Right now, they're in a very bad state. And I think India's been very right to kind of snap that. But then when there is an opposition government there, I mean, when the opposition comes to power, do they really walk the talk? Do they really? Because they have gone on record. They have called Justin Trudeau a liar. They have been saying that he's trying to clean things up. So we have to see. That's one. And the other thing is that, yes, India has to be transparent. India has done a brilliant thing by putting the ball in Canada's court, by giving them the list of the 26 names that, that India has been demanding. And Canada has, as usual, not really done anything on that. So I think Canada is calling its own bluff. You don't really need to do much on that. That's one part. The other part is that I think we all understand that this is not just about Trudeau. This is not just about a spat or a diplomatic spat, no matter how ugly. It is also about the kind of 3 million people out there. And I think end of the day, we also have to be careful of not letting this theory fly that everybody that stays in Canada is a Khalistani, or all Sikhs, which like more than 7 lakh Sikhs in Canada are basically Khalistanis. So I don't think that this should fly. I think there was also genuine interest, genuine convergence, like somebody said that, it's just counterintuitive because India and Canada should really be on friendly terms with respect to how the geopolitics is. So that's one part. Now, very quickly, so I have mentioned that, right? I mean, about the trade, about the pension funds, and about all that. So those things need to be kept in mind. What happens to the students? Canada is really one of the most favorite destinations when it comes to Indian students. So all of that is going on. We have not really seen any sanctions so far. And I think we have to keep those things in mind as well. So we have to basically balance this out. But I think Indian government has done a wonderful job by doing what it has done, which is by putting the ball in Canada's court. The other thing about the US, I think I somehow, to me, it is extremely counterintuitive that ultimately, if you see in the last 10 years how exactly the US-India ties have deepened, and how repeatedly, whether it's the External Affairs Minister or our Raksha Mantri, they have gone on record saying again and again that this is a relationship, this is a bilateral relationship, which is the most important strategic partnership for India today. And the kind of deepening that you see by way of all these path-breaking, not just foundational agreements, but also all the other things that we have signed, it does seem very counterintuitive, because if today the West's Indo-Pacific strategy has to work, they have to have a more empowered India in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think somewhere this also needs to be handled with a bit of care, because I think conspiracy theories are of course very popular, but then we need to handle that with a bit of care, because it's very counterintuitive, and that's why I've never really seen.
All right, we have a paucity of time. Very quickly, Professor Nalapat, what about the US involvement here? How does that play out? Of course, Swasti just described that the relationship between our countries has been, an amicable one. But, there are obviously telltale signs that the Americans have also been a part of this.
Well, I'd fully endorse Swasti's view, and I'd like to point out very clearly that the fact of the matter is that the Kanishka tragedy, the Kanishka bombing would not have taken place if Trudeau's father had basically complied with the Indian extradition request. And I think there was one chap who planned that particular bombing, and he was not extradited. Neither was any action taken. When a lot of actionable intelligence was given to Canada, they did nothing, absolutely nothing, and so many innocent people lost their lives, including a huge majority who were Canadian citizens. I don't see why that's not an issue in Canada. I mean, the government's own negligence in not obeying an Indian extradition request, or at least in verifying what the Indian dossier was, and in taking action against the person who basically was the mastermind of the Kanishka bombing. Look, Prime Minister Modi is on his way to, he's tomorrow, I think, he's on his way to the BRICS conference. And yes, this must annoy a lot of people who are Russophobic. And, Russophobia was good in the Cold War I days, but today in Cold War II, Russophobia detracts from the main threat to the Indo-Pacific, which is certainly not Russia, but another country, China. So I'd like to say Prime Minister Modi is going to BRICS, and he's going to take up the concerns of the global south. He's going to take up the concerns of people who have not had their voices heard. He did that in the G20 last year, and he got the African Union admitted, along with the European Union, which has been a member from the beginning. The African Union is also now a full member, and that's a great thing. So the point is, yes, Vineet, there are a lot of things that India is doing which some people in the US do not like. But I want to point out in a democracy, there are many voices. And when you have a president who is frankly not really very attentive to his job, like Joe Biden, different departments and different wings of different departments do their own thing. And I think, as has correctly been said by the previous discussion, this seems to be certain lobbies, anti-India lobbies working within the State Department, within the US system, within various other departments to try and poison India-US relations. But I quite agree, they're not going to be poisoned. I mean, Prime Minister Modi did not allow relations with Russia to nosedive as a consequence of pressure. And I can assure you that as far as India is concerned, we are very firm on our national interest. But I'd like to only say that I think it's important that we ensure that on our part, we behave with the dignity that we have, and basically we ensure that our long-term interests and the long-term interests of the major democracies and the Indo-Pacific is maintained, ignoring, not ignoring, but some of these efforts that are desperately being made before the election to try and torpedo India-US relations. Before the election, we don't know, the feeling Trump may come. So before the election, they want to torpedo the India-US relationship. I don't believe it's going to happen. But Prime Minister Modi is a very wise leader, and he looks at the long term. He looks at the basic interest. It's not going to happen, but these elements are doing all they can to try. And Trudeau, unfortunately, is handing them.
All right. Ambassador Mukherjee, closing thoughts, ma'am, on the American involvement here and what it means for India.
American involvement is coming from the middle and lower levels of the US State Department. The US State Department is divided into two parts. The top part absolutely agrees with what Professor Nalapat has said, which is that the India-US strategic partnership is one of the most important for both countries. But at the middle and lower level, there are elements, and it's clear that the Biden administration is no longer in control of these elements, and these elements are encouraging and putting forth Trudeau the manner in which Zelensky has been put forward by the West. I quite agree, and we have been able to salvage our relationship with the US. We've made a clear distinction between the Canadian allegations and what the Americans have said, but there is no doubt that if after the presidential election, the Americans continue in this manner, there will be some damage to the partnership, because public opinion in India is getting affected. the public opinion in India up till now accepted that the two most important partners for India are United States and Israel. But if it continues in this manner, public opinion will get affected, and we are a democracy. We have to at certain point also listen to public opinion. But I am confident that if there is a Trump victory, this kind of double speak will stop. If there is a Harris victory, we will have to look at it very much more carefully, because Harris and Biden have the same policy. Biden has not been able to control the State Department at the middle and lower level. I very much doubt whether Harris can do that. So we have to watch and wait. It's a very tricky time for India, because there are huge stakes involved, and we just have to ride it out. But as I said, this is not just a question of Trudeau bashing. We have to understand that from the back, he is being manipulated like a puppet.
All right. Well, appreciate everyone who joined us. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. A lot of nuances to be explored when it comes to this complex and intricate relationship between India and Canada.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.